Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's Worst Reoccurring Characters from each Star Trek series. This video is a Patreon requested video requested by patron Kyrie091, which is the second part in a pair of videos where I state my favorite and least favorite characters, recurring characters from each of the Star Trek series. So, last month I did the best, i.e. my favorite recurring characters from each Star Trek series. So now I am back to do the worst, i.e. my least favorite characters, recurring characters from each of the Star Trek series. So I'll go through each of the Star Trek series one by one to name the character, the recurring character that I think is the worst. Now, just as I did in the other video, I'm defining a recurring character as someone who has appeared in at least 2 episodes. Most likely not someone who's just a background extra or doesn't have any lines or just 1 or 2 lines. A character that has some prominence. But yeah, for most part, I tried to pick characters that reoccurred more than twice, but in some series, particularly the newer ones, which don't have as many episodes, I couldn't do that. So that's why the minimum is at least 2 episodes. So, anywho, let me go ahead and get started with my list. And we'll start with Star Trek, the original series. Which again, the original series, as I mentioned in my video last week, didn't have very many recurring characters. However, picking a worst recurring character for the original series was very easy. It's Harry Mudd. I really do not like Harry Mudd. I never did. He only appeared in 2 episodes of the original series. However, he also appeared in an episode of the animated series. So really, I would count that as 3 appearances. And then, of course, he appeared in 2 episodes of Discovery and a short Trek, but played by a different actor. And so I actually didn't mind that version of Harry Mudd as much, although I still didn't like him. But this version of Harry Mudd, well, first of all, the first episode he appears in is Mudd's Women, which I think is one of the worst episodes of the original series. It was just, some fat guy pimping out hot chicks to be wives and saying he has a drug that would make them beautiful. And then the animated series appearance is like even worse, where he says he has this drug that will make people fall in love with other people, and Nurse Chapel takes it to try to get Spock to fall in love with her. It's ridiculous. And then Mudd was probably the least offensive of his appearances, where he takes over a planet with androids. But so he wasn't quite as annoying in that episode, but he was still annoying. Like, I don't know, I find this type of character, maybe, like, particularly how he's portrayed to be this outdated 60s comedy trope that doesn't work very well, about the scoundrel who's like, "Oh, Captain Kirk, and the way he talks, and I hate it. I hate this character. I absolutely hate it. So next, move over to Star Trek: The Next Generation, where there wasn't too many bad recurring characters. So it was the one I picked isn't actually that terrible, and that's Luoxana Troi. She's still very annoying. Now, I maintain, and I will still maintain to my dying breath, that her appearances in Deep Space Nine were worse than her appearances in The Next Generation, that she wasn't quite as annoying in Next Generation as she was in Deep Space Nine. But, I got other ideas for Deep Space Nine. And she was only in 3 episodes of Deep Space Nine, where she was in, I believe, 6 episodes in Next Generation. And I think mainly her appearances in Deep Space Nine were worse because she doesn't really fit there. There's no reason for her to be there. Whereas in Next Generation, well, at least she's Counselor Troy's mother. So at least there's an excuse for her to be involved. And, you know, during a couple episodes, I thought she was actually decent, like Dark Page and Half a Life, which I actually thought was a pretty good episode, and that they did a good job with her. But other episodes like Haven and The Man Trap, especially, not The Man Trap, that's the original series, Manhunt, Manhunt is definitely by far the worst appearance. It's one of the worst episodes of Next Generation. It's her worst appearance, where she was being obtuse, she was being annoying, she actually wasn't being telepathic, but they came up with an excuse saying that her condition was blocking her telepathy or something, whatever. But they often, like, bad uses of her will forget the fact that, hey, she can freaking read people's minds. She was kind of annoying and kind of funny in Cost of Living, so it's kind of like half and half in that episode. And Menage a Try, I thought it was fine. I think people give that episode more grief than it deserves, but definitely The Man Trap was a piece of garbage. And even in the good episodes she's in, it is annoying. Like, the whole point of her character is to be annoying, and sometimes as an audience member watching this show, that is very grating. And so whenever I would hear this, oh, Counselor, oh, yeah, well, I can't remember what she called her daughter, but whatever. Oh, Jean-Luc, there we go. Whenever I'd see her appear, I'm just like, oh, god damn it. Not this. Why do they insist on bringing back this character? And of course, Gene Roddenberry wanted to do a Loxana Troy sitcom show. And by the way, they were going to do a Harry Mudd spin-off show in the 60s, but I think Gene Roddenberry wasn't interested and got distracted, so it never went forward, which, thank God. But anyway, they want to do spin-offs of terrible characters. Don't ask me why. Anyway, this leads us to Deep Space Nine, where it's anyone who's seen my channel know what I'm going to say, because not only do I think this is the worst recurring character in Deep Space Nine, I think this is the worst character in the Star Trek franchise, because I made a video where I counted down the top 20 worst characters in the entire Star Trek franchise, and this was my number one, and that, of course, is good old Vic Fontaine. Now, I had a lot of pushback about this, because apparently there's some people who don't mind him or actually like him. But what really bothered me most about him, well, first of all, he's introduced late in this series and he seems unnecessary. Secondly, he's a sentient hologram who is kind of, this narrative function that he serves is just a surrogate for Guinan. And again, like, if you're going to have a Guinan-like character, why not introduce them like at least before the 5th season? Like, it's kind of too late to do it now. But regardless, it's kind of just a cliche that this is the one another Guinan. But also the fact that he's a sentient hologram and no one really acknowledges this. Like, they talk about deleting his program willy-nilly, like they're not talking about like murdering a sentient being. But anyway, but I'm skating around the issue. The main reason why I can't stand this character is because he's a freaking lounge singer, and that they devote, every time he appears, they devote at least 2 or 3 minutes, sometimes even 5 minutes, to him sitting there singing a goddamn lounge song. And that's what I find intolerable. I think my sister mentioned in her videos how she believes that kind of music is the worst music ever invented. Now, I don't think I'd go that far. I'm not as sort of against the music, but I don't want it in my fucking Star Trek show. In fact, I don't even care if it's music I like, which is an example in Picard Season 2. I actually kind of like that version of the Pat Benatar song they did, but it was such a terrible, awful sequence. It's still one of the worst moments in the entire franchise. It doesn't matter whether or not I like the song. It's a freaking sci-fi show, especially one as good as Deep Space Nine, which is devoted to like these complex characters and these gray moral tales that are very thought-provoking. And why am I taking 5 minutes out of this great storytelling to listen to some fuckhead sing a goddamn lounge song? irritates the hell out of me. And that combined with the fact that the character is kind of useless and just thrown in there and just like, hey, Polly, or whatever. And it easily makes him the worst character in the entire franchise. So, next we'll move over to... Oh, yeah, before I move over to the Voyager, I also want to throw out some honorable mentions from Deep Space Nine, like Brunt. It was very close second place because I don't like the Ferengi storyline. So in that same vein, Zek, even though Wallace Shawn's awesome, Zek still annoys the fuck out of me. And Ishka and all of them. Yeah, so those will all be second place. And it has a said Luoxan and Troy. But yeah, Deep Space Nine, I like it better than Next Generation, but it definitely has more... Well, it has more recurring characters overall, because I mentioned in my best video that the number of great recurring characters in Deep Space Nine outnumbers every show, and if I were just doing best recurring characters of the franchise, the whole entire top 10 would be made up of Deep Space Nine characters. But I guess the flip side of that is it also has more bad recurring characters as well. So, yeah, bad and the good. Anyway... So now we'll move over to Voyager, and where my pick for worst reoccurring character is the Borg Queen. Easily, this character single-handedly ruined Star Trek Voyager, and and a lot of people talk about how Voyager ruined the Borg, but really Voyager was doing just fine with the Borg until they introduced the Borg Queen, and once they introduced the Borg Queen, then they ruined the Borg. Had they not brought in the Borg Queen, then actually the Borg would have been fine. And those Borg episodes that do not feature the Borg Queen are actually pretty good, and some of the best episodes of Voyager. It's when they brought in the goddamn Queen, when they started to ruin everything. So yeah, this character pretty much single-handedly ruined Voyager. So, I know some people really hate the Borg Queen in general, and I'm not a big fan of the Borg Queen because the whole idea of there being a single individual who controls the Borg, I don't like, and the writers even admitted they did this because they needed to put a more personal face on the Borg, but I think the Borg actually worked better and were more ominous without a, queen or a individual that they can interact with. It's so in First Contact, I didn't like her that much, but she didn't ruin the entire movie for me. Like, she was okay, like she was acceptable, but in the Voyager, they made her way more like cartoonish, over the top, and she even had this cartoonish line every time she saw Janeway. She'd go, Janeway, like a cartoon villain would, and it was so ridiculous. And then of course I couldn't even get into all the plot holes in the James Bond villain-esque plans that she would come up with to take down humanity when they have a fucking fleet of ships and a Borg hub, and all they need to do is send those ships to Earth and completely conquer. Yet she never does this. Instead, she does the Scooby-Doo-esque villain schemes and bullshit. Easily the worst character of Voyager. Next, we'll get into Enterprise, where... I like to shit on Enterprise, especially its first two seasons. I have been on the record saying that the first two seasons of Enterprise are the worst of the franchise. Well, that's until Picard Season 2. That's easily the worst. But other than that, the first two seasons of Enterprise were the worst seasons of Star Trek. But despite that, I actually couldn't find that many bad characters. I couldn't actually find any bad characters, recurring characters, that is, in Enterprise. Pretty much all of them were decent to some degree or another, so I had to choose my least favorite, someone who was okay but used very poorly in a couple of episodes, and that is Ambassador Saval. The Vulcan ambassador, played by the dude who was on the Alien Nation show back in the early 90s. And he also played a Ocampan in Voyager once. But anyway, he See, I liked how they used Ambassador Saval in the later season. Of course, the later seasons of Enterprise were actually good, especially season 3 was one of my favorite seasons of the entire franchise. But and how they used them in season 4, because they sort of reformed the Vulcans and got away from the Vulcans being dickheads, and so he was actually a good character in season 4. And even some of his appearances in season 2, like the ceasefire one, was decent. They developed him and made him an interesting character. It's mainly in season 1, and especially I think his worst appearance is actually Shockwave Part 2, the season 2 premiere, as when they were on this kick of all Vulcans being dickheads. And it really, especially, so his appearance in Shockwave Part 2, he was being obtuse. The Vulcans were going to shut down Starfleet, or at least recommend that Starfleet shut down and not explore space, because they accidentally killed all these people. But then he was presented with hard proof that Starfleet did not cause the accident. It was Suliban sabotage, and there was hard proof. And he acknowledged, okay, you're right. Starfleet had nothing to do with why all these people died, but I think they should shut down anyway. What the fuck? Why is he being so obtuse? That was such plot contrivance. That was just BS to create a tense situation that the humans had to overcome. And he was just he's not being logical. And for most of his appearances, even some of his appearances in later seasons, he's not being a emotionless Vulcan who's logical. He's being a prick who's condescending and obviously holds a grudge. So, yeah, he had some terrible appearances in the earlier seasons, even though overall I don't think this character is that bad, because they made him better in the final season. But in those earlier seasons, and not all of them either, there's some episodes, as I said, in season 2 where he was decent, but there was a couple where he was just an illogical prick. So he's going to have to be my pick for worst reoccurring character in Enterprise. So next we move over to Star Trek Discovery, and my pick for worst reoccurring character there is going to be Admiral Cornwell. If you watch my Discovery reviews, you probably heard me complain about her. I didn't like her as a character, and this mainly came from an early appearance in Discovery where there's this episode where Saru tortures a sentient being, and it features no repercussions to it, and Stamets injects himself with like DNA from that tardigrade, from that being that Saru was torturing, in order to stop him from torturing a sentient being, an innocent sentient being. Well, it did kill some people, but it was, a different kind of alien, didn't understand what it was doing. But regardless, it was an innocent sentient being that Saru was torturing, like, to death. Like, it was going to die from his torturing. And Stamets injected himself with some DNA to stop Saru from torturing this innocent being. And so Admiral Cornwell comes on board in the next episode, and does she threaten to throw Stamets in a penitentiary, which by all rights he should be. He should be at least court-martialed, stripped of his commission for the very least. I think he should face jail time, actually. But does she do that? No. Instead, she complains about Stamets for violating the genetic messing with bullshit because of the fucking con bullshit. I'm like, fuck this Admiral. Fuck her. She doesn't understand Starfleet. She doesn't understand what it stands for. She deserves to be thrown in prison as well. So anyway, yeah, and also it's just most of her appearances, she gave me these vibes as someone who didn't understand Starfleet, didn't understand what the Federation stood for, and she was just a bit... I can't remember all this. It's been a while since I've seen the other Discovery episodes, but I know there were other instances where she seemed to just be cranky or an adversary just for plot contrivance. So... and I was actually kind of happy when she died. I was like, thank God I'm getting rid of this character. So that's my pick for least favorite character of Discovery. So next we'll go into Picard. Now, Picard is kind of like, you know how I said with Deep Space Nine, there's so many great characters in the best recurring character list, it's hard to choose just one. Picard's like that, but with worse characters. Oh god, like almost every single one of his recurring characters, well, except for the current season, because I actually like the recurring characters in the current season, but seasons 1 and 2, pretty much all the recurring characters were bad characters. Like I really wanted to pick the two Romulan adversaries, Narissa and Narek, from season 1, because they were some of the worst villains, absolute terrible villains. Every time they cut back to their storyline, their scenes, I was like, groaned so badly. And then there's Alton Soon, who appeared as Dr. Soon's son, who most definitely did not exist, all of a sudden at the end of season 1. And, you know, I already talked about the Borg Queen, so there's no reason to bring her up here again. And so I'm definitely going to have to go with, as the worst, though, even worse than those other characters, was Adam Soon, who was Soon's ancestor, who looked exactly like Soon, because he's also played by Brent Spiner. And in the 21st century, who is such a mustache-twirly villain. First, they kind of portray him as someone who's trying to save his daughter, but then they find out he's totally evil and kind of created her as a genetic experiment, and that he just, for no reason, decides to help Q and help the Borg Queen try to kill Picard and his people. It's like, it doesn't make any sense. This was some of the worst. It was the worst writing in all of Star Trek, and this character was so flat, so dimensionless, so let's just have him be evil with no goddamn explanation. It was terrible. So, next we'll get into Lower Decks, Star Trek Lower Decks, and this one was hard because I do like almost all the recurring characters in Lower Decks, but eventually, even though I'm kind of cheating here, because he really only appeared in 1 episode, he did technically appear in 2, because he appeared in a post-credit scene and last year's finale, and I'm sure he'll appear again, and that is Badgie. I hate Badgie. So many people liked Badgie and wanted to bring him back. I mean, I get the joke. It's kind of making fun of Clippy from Microsoft Word, except he turns homicidal and evil. But it was just cheesy to me. I just, beyond that joke, the way he behaved, why he was just evil all of a sudden for no good reason and wanted to kill his father, Rutherford. It was just, I don't know. I stopped finding it funny and mainly just find it annoying. So yeah, I don't like Badgie. So for Star Trek Prodigy, I'm going to pick the outrageous Okana. Theoden Okana, who appeared in the episode The Outrageous Okana in TNG, and they brought him back. I believe he appeared in at least 2 episodes of Prodigy. And why? Why, if you're going to bring back any one-off characters from previous Star Trek shows, why the hell would you pick Okana, one of the worst characters to pick? And in Prodigy, he kind of reminded me of Hondo from Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, and I hated Hondo. He was just, he reminded me of the old pirate type who can't be trusted, but except not even as good as Hondo, because he was more goofy, and then he ends up betraying. He goes aboard the Protostar with them. Why, I don't know, and he just ends up leaving right away because he betrays them immediately. So I don't know. Why would you bring back this character? Why? He's a bad character. Anyway. So next we get into Strange New Worlds, which Strange New Worlds has only been out for 10 episodes, so they don't have that many reoccurring characters to choose from. So I am going to choose Sam Kirk. Now, I don't totally hate Sam Kirk. I don't think he's a terrible character, but I kind of think they don't need him, and he's unnecessary, and we don't need to see Jim Kirk's brother because he was barely existed in the original series. He just died immediately, and plus he was established to be a scientist, not in Starfleet, and so they kind of retconning it to bring him back. And plus, he kind of reminds me of the security guard or the red shirt character guy from Galaxy Quest that was played by Sam Rockwell. Just like, it's sort of silly, and he's like cowardly when he would filled the role of Hudson in that Alien, at the episode that was ripping off aliens. And so he's like, kind of an annoying guy. Like, I don't think this is the worst character ever, and maybe if they didn't call him Sam Kirk and called him something else, I wouldn't be as annoyed. But it just seems like too much fan service, playing to the fans. Oh, it's Captain Kirk's brother. We don't need to see his brother. We don't need him, and it kind of defies canon, so just don't do this character. Or at least call him something else. So that would be my pick for Strange New Worlds. So that is it. Those are my picks for worst reoccurring characters in the Star Trek franchise. Thank you so much for watching this, and of course thank you to Kyrie091 for requesting this video, and of course thanks to all of my Patreon supporters who support me on Patreon. It is very much extremely appreciated. We have our supporters: Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Viles, Brian A., Alessandro Miguelcio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal Howells. Thank you all so very much for your support, and thank you for checking out this video. If you did enjoy it, please check out my channel, as I do many more videos on Star Trek. I'm covering Star Trek the original series and Star Trek Picard at the moment, and of course I cover many other shows as well, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.